What if a single encounter in a dense forest could be the beginning of peace? And what if one small decision, not to attack, became the beginning of civilization as we know it today? If you enjoy suspenseful, conflict-filled, and deeply human love stories, listen to this story until the end. And afterward, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think love can truly overcome inherited hatred? Write in the comments. I'll read your interesting comments in the next story. The sound of dry leaves rustled as Arrow walked slowly beneath the shade of the giant trees. The forest was silent, except for the occasional distant roar of an unknown beast. The sun was obscured by dark clouds, casting strange shadows among the towering tree trunks. Arrow, a young man from the Laka tribe, carried a sharp wooden spear in his right hand. His eyes were sharp, tracing deer tracks in the mud. He had been walking for hours, leaving his group for an important task, bringing meat home before sunset. But something felt different that day. The deer tracks he was following suddenly stopped near a small stream. He bent down, touched the mud with his fingertips, and discovered something unusual. There were other footprints. Smaller. Not deer. Not members of his tribe either. These were human tracks, but unfamiliar. The tracks headed upstream. Arrow stood, his heart pounding. He knew the rules of his tribe. Stay away from the border and never cross the river. Beyond was the territory of the Gun tribe. They were known for their cruelty and would not hesitate to kill anyone who crossed their line. But curiosity overcame fear. Slowly he followed the trail. The undergrowth began to thicken, and the sounds of wild birds faded as Arrow grew further from the safe zone. Suddenly, from behind the bushes, he heard the sound of branches cracking. Arrow crouched, his body ready to pounce, his hand gripping the spear tightly. His breath caught. Then, from behind the thin mist that enveloped the forest, a figure emerged. Woman. Her hair was long and tangled, and her eyes stared at him in shock. She looked frightened, but she didn't run away. Arrow froze. He had never seen a face like that before. It was unfamiliar, yet as if familiar from a dream. The woman also carried a spear, but she didn't point it. They stared at each other in silence. Neither one spoke a word. But amidst the howling wind and pounding hearts, something began to grow. A storm began to sound in the distance. The sky darkened. Rain was imminent. They had to decide quickly. Stay where they were or seek shelter together. The rain came down hard. The drops were like arrows piercing the dense foliage. Arrow ran through the undergrowth, occasionally looking back to make sure the woman was following. They didn't speak, but their body language made it clear. They had to weather the storm together. Not far from the river, Arrow found a small cave hidden behind large rocks. He pointed toward it, and the woman nodded quickly. They ran inside and took shelter inside, their bodies soaked, shivering from the cold air and the animal skins clinging to their bodies. Inside the cave, the only sounds were the rain and heavy breathing. Arrow lit a small fire with a flint and dry fibers he kept in a leather pouch. The fire blazed, slowly warming the atmosphere. The woman sat across from the fire, still silent, but no longer fearful. Her eyes watched his every move. Then, in a low voice and a foreign accent, she said, "Lena." Arrow looked at her. She nodded slowly and pointed to herself. Arrow! Those were the first words they exchanged. Two names from two worlds that should never have been united. Worlds separated by war, revenge, and unbreakable rules. Lena opened a small deerskin pouch and took out a wild fruit. She gently pushed it toward Arrow. Arrow took it hesitantly, but finally took a bite. It tasted sweet, and for a moment he forgot the danger lurking outside. A strong wind screamed outside the cave. The fire swayed, casting their shadows on the stone wall. In the flickering light, they stared at each other again. No words were spoken, only gazes that slowly shifted from wariness to curiosity, from fear to warmth. Time passed imperceptibly. The rain still poured, but inside the cave, two humans from different worlds had begun to open a door that had been tightly closed, the door of trust. But Arrow knew that when the storm subsided and night turned to morning, reality would knock again. Their tribe would not accept this. The outside world would not care about the feelings that were beginning to develop within that small cave. And in the distance, hidden behind the dark trees, a pair of eyes watched them. The morning sun emerged from behind the mist. Dew still dripped from the leaves when Arrow opened his eyes. Lena was still asleep, leaning against the stone wall, her face serene. The cave no longer felt unfamiliar. But the world outside hadn't changed. Arrow knew he had to return to his tribe. He knew Lena had to return to hers too. They belonged to two sides that had long hunted and spilled blood. But in that silent night, they had violated the boundaries established by their own ancestors. Before the sun had fully risen, Arrow stood. He stared at Lena's face, trying to memorize every line. He raised his spear not for battle but for protection. As he stepped outside, a loud noise suddenly shattered the silence. An arrow shot out, penetrating the rock right next to his head. Arrow fell to the ground, ducked, and then immediately stood ready to fight. 3 armed men emerged from behind the trees. Their faces were painted with red clay. They were from the Gun tribe. One of them, the largest, shouted something in a harsh language. He recognized Lena. His face was full of anger. Lena emerged from the cave and stood before Arrow. She raised her hand, shouting to them in her tribe's language. They paused for a moment, confused. But one of them, who appeared to be the leader, raised his bow. Arrow stepped forward. He stood beside Lena, not to attack but to defend. They didn't move, didn't speak. They simply stood side by side, facing the arrows that threatened their lives. Then another shout came from behind. The men of the Laka tribe had arrived. They saw Arrow, the leader's son, standing with a woman from the enemy tribe. They raised their weapons. In a matter of seconds, the 2 long feuding groups faced each other. The forest fell silent, as if holding their breath. Lena took a step forward. She raised her spear and dropped it to the ground. Arrow followed. The sound of the spear hitting the ground was like a small bell, breaking the spell of violence. From both sides no one moved. But no one attacked either. That's when an elder of the Laka tribe stepped forward. His face was lined with wrinkles, but his voice was strong. Love is not a shame. It's courage. He looked at Arrow and Lena, then turned to his people. If they can put down their weapons, why can't we? The silence was broken by whispers. Then slowly, one by one, spears were lowered. Bows were released. Breaths were released. Arrow and Lena still stood in the center. There was no hug, no kiss. Just 2 hands slowly clasping. In the midst of the ground that was once red with blood, 2 souls now became a bridge. They didn't know if this would last. They didn't know if this peace was real or temporary. But one thing was certain. Their love had left a mark. A mark that would one day be etched into human history.